Super Tuesday in the world of politics, and that's where we're going to begin. 15 states and a territory head to the polls to vote in nominating contests for both parties, Republicans and the Democrats. On the Republican side, if you need a reminder, former President Donald Trump is squaring off against Nikki Haley, with more than a third of the total delegates on the line today. Caitlin Huey Burns is in one of the states holding a primary today because it'd be hard to be in all 15 at once. Caitlin, good morning.
Good morning to you, Tony. It's always a good morning when voters are voting. And Donald Trump actually added to that delegate count you mentioned last night with a victory in the North Dakota caucuses. But now all attention turns to Super Tuesday, which the results could signal the end of Nikki Haley's campaign.
Hello, Texas!
Nikki Haley finished a multi-state tour in Texas with a campaign rally that could be her last.
At some point, maybe we should say the reason that America keeps losing is because of Donald Trump.
But in one point of agreement with her Republican rival,
I want him on that ballot.
Haley supported a unanimous Supreme Court ruling Monday that Colorado cannot remove former President Donald Trump from the primary ballot for his conduct around the January 6th insurrection. Instead, ruling states may disqualify persons attempting to hold state office, not the presidency. Now, Maine and Illinois will have to follow suit after similar challenges.
You cannot take somebody out of a race. The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly, but a court shouldn't be doing that.
Trump said he hoped the high court would also rule in his favor on presidential immunity in his federal election interference case, a question the justices will take up next month.
If a president doesn't have full immunity, you really don't have a president.
Trump's legal battles have become a rallying cry for his campaign and have helped to fuel support among Republicans.
I feel like all the states that are going after him are it's all political. It makes me feel stronger to back him.
And even with tonight's big delegate haul, Donald Trump won't yet secure the number of delegates needed to officially secure the Republican nomination. His campaign estimates that that could come as early as next week. And as for Nikki Haley, she has no events on the schedule today. She's expected to be back in her home state of South Carolina. Tony?
All right, Caitlin, thank you very much. Be sure to watch CBS News' extensive coverage of the Super Tuesday primary starting at 8 p.m. Eastern on CBS News streaming and continuing right here on CBS with a special at 10 p.m. Eastern.
Now to a major international issue affecting the campaign, America's policy in the Middle East. The White House is intensifying calls for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war, even hosting a rival of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Weijia Jiang is following this at the White House. Weijia, good morning. Very controversial meeting back in Israel.
Nancy, good morning to you and good morning to everybody. It sure was, but it was a very important one for this administration. Vice President Kamala Harris hosted a member of Israel's war cabinet who also met with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell yesterday. His name is Benny Gantz. Harris and Gantz spoke about the urgency of negotiating a deal to rescue more than 100 hostages who are believed to be in captivity. As part of an agreement, the vice president stressed the need for a temporary ceasefire to allow hostages to be released and for more humanitarian aid to flow into Gaza. Just one day earlier, she delivered a passionate plea for a 6-week pause in the violence. The White House says Gantz requested the visit, which Prime Minister Netanyahu fiercely opposed. The fact that it happened anyway shows cracks in Israel's war cabinet as it decides how this conflict will come to an end. Gantz is a political rival of Netanyahu and often floated as a potential successor. President Biden did not meet with Gantz. He was at Camp David preparing for his State of the Union address, which several family members of hostages are expected to attend. Gantz is set to meet with Secretary of State Antony Blinken today. Tony?
Weijia, thank you very much. The U.S. is also planning a second airdrop of aid into Gaza and applying new pressure on Israel to loosen restrictions on convoys of food trucks. But as the United Nations warns, on the one hand, of possible mass starvation in Gaza, a UN report is also providing new information on the horrific acts of violence that started this war and continued for the hostages. Imtiaz Tayyab has more. And we should warn you, and we really, really mean it this time, these details are graphic.
In the harrowing hours of Hamas's rampage across southern Israel on October 7th, some women suffered sexual violence, according to a new report by the UN Special Envoy on Sexual Violence.
We also found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, occurred.
The UN report also found there are reasonable grounds to believe the abuse of hostages is ongoing. But the UN's experts said this was not an investigation. They did not meet any survivors of sexual violence or look at forensic evidence. They did, however, interview dozens of witnesses, review thousands of photos, and some 50 hours of video of the attack. The UN team also visited the Israeli-occupied West Bank to examine allegations of sexual assault of Palestinians in Israeli jails and detention centers, allegations the UN team deemed credible. In Gaza, the UN says hundreds of thousands are on the brink of famine. But for Yazan Al-Kafarna, it's already too late. Our CBS News team first reported on the 10-year-old with cerebral palsy this past weekend as he lay in bed starving. Yesterday, his father Sharif buried Yazan with his bare hands.
Now, ceasefire talks in Cairo are shaky but ongoing, although Israel still has yet to send a delegation. The Biden administration, meanwhile, continues to make its strongest case yet for a pause in the fighting to get hostages out and desperately needed humanitarian aid in to Gaza. Nate.
MTS Tayyab in Israel, thank you. Here in the U.S., officials are investigating a massive fire at a vape storage warehouse north of Detroit. Take a look. As you can hear, the fire set off a series of explosions, sending debris more than 1,000 feet into the air. One firefighter and a bystander were hurt. Officials say the fire is now under control.
The Supreme Court has temporarily blocked a tough new immigration law in Texas from taking effect today. The law gives state officials the power to arrest migrants who cross into Texas illegally. The Biden administration argues that is the federal government's job. Illegal crossings at the southern border hit a record high last year. Omar Villafranca reports on the enforcement showdown between Texas and federal officials.
The goal of Senate Bill 4 is to stop the tidal wave of illegal entry into Texas.
That was Texas Governor Greg Abbott in December as he signed SB 4 into law. The bill, which was set to go into effect today, would allow state law enforcement to arrest migrants for illegal border crossings and Texas judges to order migrants to either return to Mexico or serve jail time.
We're not imposing a Texas border policy. Texas, very simply, is enforcing the laws that are the policy of the United States Congress.
In a recent interview with 60 Minutes, Abbott insisted SB 4 does not overstep the federal government. But last week, a Texas district judge blocked the law, arguing that it violates the Constitution's Supremacy Clause and conflicts with key provisions of federal immigration law. Texas's Attorney General appealed the ruling, and over the weekend, a federal court granted the state a temporary stay. And Monday, at the Justice Department's urging, the Supreme Court stepped in to stop SB 4 from taking effect, with Justice Samuel Alito giving Texas until March 11th to file a response.
We need a lot of help.
Back in December, we met Maverick County Sheriff Tom Schmerber in Eagle Pass, 2 days after Abbott signed SB 4 into law. Schmerber told us he was concerned about enforcing it.
Is that work that your sheriff deputies can do? Do you want to do it?
We don't want to do it, and it's going to be impossible. I don't have the manpower nor the space. Comes March, if we have to do it, I don't know how.
For CBS Mornings, I'm Omar Villafranca.
A civilian employee of the U.S. Air Force, who is also a retired Army officer, has been accused of sharing classified information on a foreign dating website. Scott McFarland is following this story and another high-profile case linked to U.S. military secrets. Scott, a dating website, good morning.
Hey, Tony, prosecutors say David Slater had a top-secret security clearance after retiring as a lieutenant colonel for the U.S. Army. He worked as a civilian at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, and prosecutors say He attended classified briefings on the war in Ukraine with U.S. Strategic Command between February and April 2022. They allege Slater sent classified information through messages on a dating website to an unnamed co-conspirator who claimed to be a woman living in Ukraine and who allegedly referred to Slater as her secret informant love. He's charged with conspiracy, makes his first appearance in court in Nebraska today. In another case, Massachusetts National Guard member Jack Texera returns to court in September for sentencing in another leak of military secrets. He pleaded guilty to 6 federal charges yesterday, accused of printing, collecting, and posting classified information about troop movements and war plans in Ukraine in a series of 40,000 online messages. He faces a recommendation of 16 years in prison when he's back for sentencing. Nate?
Scott, thank you. A major storm could soon cause flooding as it heads up to the East Coast. Here it is, a system that has already wreaked havoc in the South. Meteorologist Jim Cantori with our partners at the Weather Channel joins us now. Jim, good morning.
Good morning, Nate. Yeah, no easy task getting around the Big Easy yesterday. Streets were flooded all over the place. So here we are on Super Tuesday. We've colored those states in purple for you, 15 states. But you look at this, you're like, well, you know what? I don't see 15 here because a lot of them across the South inundated with the rainfall here. We have 2 systems here in the east that are going to absolutely soak this area. System number 1 plaguing the Northeast today, a smaller system. But here comes number 2 through Atlanta and right up the East Coast as we go into Wednesday and Thursday. This one has a chance for wind-driven rain and even airport delays, especially on Thursday in the Boston area. That system clears on out. We get a break on Friday, but there's a new system taking aim as we head in toward the weekend. Again, big rain, flood potential for our friends in the Northeast and through here, and not a lot of snow with any of these systems. Seems like winter has taken a big break, Nate, in the eastern part of the country. You can watch the Weather Channel on cable or live on your favorite TV streaming devices. Back to you, buddy.
Winter taking a big break. I like that. Jim Cantori, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, if you plan to fly on an American airliner, you're definitely going to want to see our next story. JetBlue and Spirit Airlines have canceled their planned merger after a federal judge blocked it. The judge ruled the $3.8 billion deal would hurt travelers who rely on Spirit's bargain fares. CBS News business analyst Jill Schlesinger is with us. Jill, glad to have you here. So they could have fought this, but they didn't.
Yes, they were actually looking at appealing this. But I think that once we got a court ruling back in January that was blocking this merger, it was going to be a tough road to hoe. And the reality is these 2 airlines came together after two other airlines were contemplating looking at this deal. So we thought that Spirit was going to combine with Frontier. JetBlue comes in, bids another $1 billion. The government says this looks like very anti-consumer and blocks the deal. And that's where we are this morning, which is we now have the exact same rundown of big American airlines.
And speaking of consumers, what does it mean for travelers?
Well, I think what it means is, according to the government, that this was a deal that was going to hurt competition and was going to cause fares to rise. Now, it is interesting. Fares have come down dramatically since COVID. We are back to pre-COVID levels of airfares. But when you look at this right now, I think travelers are going to see that the discount airlines like Spirit and Frontier keep the pressure on the big ones. Remember, the big 4 airlines, they compare 68% of the domestic market.
Here's what I didn't quite understand. After they scuttled the deal, JetBlue's stock went up, Spirit's stock went down. Why is that?
Well, I think JetBlue is seen as a survivor in the airline wars, and Spirit not so much. They've got tons of debt. And this stock is down by 2/3 since the government ruled against this deal. So it's going to be tough going for Spirit Airlines going forward.
All right, Jill, thank you so much. We appreciate you. The father of a Michigan school shooter goes on trial this morning in a case that raises important questions about the legal responsibility of parents. James Crumbly is charged with involuntary manslaughter after his teenage son killed 4 other students. As Elaine Keanu reports, the gunman's mother was put on trial just last month.
We find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
Last month, Jennifer Crumbly was convicted on 4 charges of involuntary manslaughter, and now it's her husband James Crumbly's turn in court.
I have done terrible things that no one should ever do.
Their son Ethan is serving a life sentence for shooting and killing 4 students at Oxford High School in 2021. He was 15 years old. Days before the shooting, James Crumbly gifted their son the 9mm handgun used in the attack. During her trial, Jennifer tried to argue that securing the weapon was her husband's responsibility.
It was more his thing, so I let him handle that. I didn't feel comfortable putting the lock thing on it.
Crumbley and his wife are accused of ignoring the shooter's mental health issues in the months prior. The morning of the shooting, the Crumbleys were called to their son's school to discuss a drawing he made showing a person bleeding from bullet holes with the written phrases, "Help me, and my life is useless." The parents left after the meeting. Less than 2 hours later, Ethan Crumbley opened fire.
Not only did he not take him out of school that day, he did not tell the school that he had recently purchased the gun. Very difficult case for the defense.
Jennifer Crumbley now faces up to a 60-year sentence. If convicted, James Crumbley faces the same penalty.
Could we see James Crumbley potentially take the stand in this trial?
James Crumbley almost has to take the stand to differentiate his behavior, his actions, from that of his wife.
For CBS Mornings, I'm Elaine Quijano.